1 Corinthians chapter 7, and this is a chapter that, without a little first century context, could really throw us off in our modern day because it has some eschatological sort of end of the age implications. And I say this with the preface that this isn't an eschatology message. I'm not presenting an end of the world sermon tonight or a prophetic sermon about how things end. But I do think we have to step into Paul's mentality in 1 Corinthians 7. And if we are to take Paul's mentality that the world is coming to an end and the whole planet is done, then we have to take serious Paul's injunction not to get married. Don't bother to repopulate the earth. They didn't feel like they were going to be there all that long. If we take it to mean something else entirely, that Paul and his peers are standing at the end of an age, the end of the old Mosaic economy, that which Paul is trying to bring the church out of. He's trying to bring them out of works. He's trying to bring them out of law. He's trying to take them from a Torah mentality into a spirit mentality, where man do not live by the letter, but they live by the spirit, where they're not living by structures and codes. They're not living based upon their bloodline or their generations or their circumcision or lack thereof or who their father was or what tribe they're from. He's trying to bring a gospel that encompasses the whole world, that allows Romans in and Italians in and eventually Chinese and Japanese and Africans and Americans, and anyone who wants to come to Jesus will be welcome. And you won't have to belong to Issachar or Reuben or Judah, or the tribes. You won't have to be able to trace your lineage to Abraham. So much of the New Testament is working around that premise to try and bring in while moving away from that old world. With that in mind, look at verse 29 where Paul says to the Corinthian church, "But this I say, brethren, the time is short, so that from now on even those who have wives should be as though they had none." I hope you understand what I mean by if Paul literally thinks that the time is short for the end of the world, then no one should be getting married since about AD 55 when he wrote this, because Paul's opinion was it's almost over with, and if it's over with, why bother with the marriage and the honeymoon? You're not going to make it anyway. And so I think if we just step outside of that version of literalism and understand that Paul believes he's at the end of the old Mosaic economy, truly believes the 24th chapter of Matthew that Jesus said that something was going to happen in the first generation of the church and that it eventually would. That temple's coming down. Jerusalem is going to fall at the hands of its enemies, and the old economy of Moses is going to be gone. Now, you and I are way past that. We're on the other side of the fall of that temple. We're not killing lambs. We're not swinging incense in the worship room. We're not wondering where the Ark of the Covenant is or how many times, or the Day of Atonement, we can go in and offer up blood on the sacrificial altar. Instead, we're focusing our faith on Jesus. And so Paul's time is short statement was for his era and his day, but it still has something special to say as we read the context on into 30 and 31. Those who weep, be as those who didn't weep, those who rejoice, as though they did not rejoice, those who buy, as though they did not possess, and those who use this world as not misusing it. Now here's the sentence that I really want to frame my thought around tonight, but I didn't want to just read one sentence, all right? For the form of this world is passing away. And the word that Paul uses, I hope you realize Paul doesn't write the New Testament in English. Most likely Paul never heard English. Paul wrote the New Testament that he wrote in Greek, and a specific style of Greek, a little more street-friendly Greek, a little more common man Greek than some of the other books of the New Testament. But Paul's are a little easier to follow. If you spoke classic Greek, it would have been a little more man-on-the-street language. And the word that Paul uses, it gets translated for the word the form, some of your translations might say the figure. The form or the figure of this world is passing away. That word form is the Greek word schema. S-C-H-E-M-A. Schema is a word that we use as the root word of our word schematic. And so if you have a schematic of something, you don't have the literal thing, but you have the condensed version of that literal thing. Think blueprint. It's not an actual word-to-word translation, but it kind of gets our mind in the right spot. The blueprint of your house is not your house. but everything about the blueprint of your house speaks of your house. It tells you how wide the room is. It tells you how tall the building is. You can't live in the blueprint, but you can imagine the house you live in by reading the blueprint. In some ways, it is a schematic. It is a breakdown of something much bigger. It's interesting that Paul uses the word schema, and schema in the Greek is literally a form or a figure or a fashion. It's not the real thing. It's not an actual object. It's just the form of the object. It's also interesting that the word schema in the Greek is very close to another Greek word that's very familiar to the English ear, and that's the Greek word echo. And the Greek word echo is actually to have. It's to bring something into possession. And an echo, of course, is just sound that bounces off of something else. We receive the sound, but we don't receive it directly. It's not the word that came directly out of the mouth. It's a form of the word that came directly out of the mouth. So you take all of that thought together, what might Paul be saying? He says, the schematics of this world, the schema of this world, the figure of this world, the form of this world, the echo of a real thing is passing away. So as Paul looks around him, he sees a world in transit. He sees a world in constant change. Now, of course the world is in constant change. That's not a hard sell for us, right? Can you imagine? It might have been a harder sell for Paul. Paul lives in a 3-mile-per-hour world. Most people in Paul's day never went past that speed on anything in their life. That's hard to imagine, isn't it? In our world, I just flew in from Dallas-Fort Worth last night on a plane that went about 565, 570 miles per hour and had a tailwind of the jet stream that brought it from Dallas, Texas to Atlanta, Georgia in an hour and 39 minutes. Unbelievable. Even 50 years ago would have been pretty unfathomable. 100 years ago would have been absolutely unbelievable. A 3-mile-an-hour world to a 575-mile-an-hour world. And that's just a domestic flight. That's not going to the moon. That's not blasting out into the atmosphere. That's not the internet. That's not pressing a button and receiving information from the other side of the world like that. Paul thought he was in a transitory world. He thought the world was changing quickly. Are we in a transitory world where the world around us isn't the same today as it was yesterday, as it was last week, as it was a month ago, and you know by experience it's probably going to be a lot different in a week, a lot different in a month, a lot different in a year, and the world around us is transitioning like crazy. And Paul says the figure of the world, the form of the world is passing away. Even regardless of Paul's eschatology, when he thought the end of the world was, man, his statement is dead on for every era. The form of the world you see today is passing away. It won't be here tomorrow. The form of the world that you see outside your window won't be here in a year. And the form of the world you just watched on the news will be old news next week.